Good morning, Dawg Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Serve Pro. We are jam-packed on today's program. Special guest joins us today. In addition to Connor Riley, who joins us every Tuesday, today we're going to have the great former Georgia linebacker Davin Bellamy on the program. Davin, one of the most outspoken, interesting guys to be around the Kirby Smart era, obviously a part of a big breakthrough team for Georgia in 2017. Davin's going to have a lot of thoughts to share on this version of the Georgia Bulldogs Day. We're looking forward to that. Connor Riley, as I said, Connor going to help us get an update on kind of where Georgia stands from a health standpoint as it rolls into the season opening game against Clemson on Saturday. But to kick things off here today, Georgia's obviously got a very high-profile season opening game against Clemson. Clemson has been one of the most prominent teams in America going back all throughout almost the majority of the college football playoff era. Obviously, much like Georgia, they've won 2 national championships. But is Clemson still that same program? And if they are, how come they're acting so weird prior to the start of this game on Saturday? I'm going to give you a couple of examples here of what I just think is just garden variety weirdness coming from Clemson, and maybe a sign that this is a program that's perhaps starting to unravel just a little bit. And if you're a Georgia fan, maybe just in time for the game coming up on Saturday. Fun conversation. Let's do it now. Glad to have you with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Serve Pro. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Serve Pro. Cleaning, restoration, construction.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
We have told you before that the vibe around this game for Georgia against Clemson to begin the 2024 season much different than it would have been back in 2021. Back then, it was Georgia that had something to prove. Clemson had been where Georgia wanted to be. It had been a perennial playoff team, 6 straight years of the college football playoff, couple of national championships. Clemson was one of just the real name brand teams in college football. Georgia was facing the questions of, could it get to Clemson's level? When Georgia beat Clemson in Charlotte to begin the 2021 season, because of all of that, the win was obviously a tremendous accomplishment for UGA and a resounding message that Georgia was ready to take a next step as a program. Well, now, if there are big questions around this game, they probably rest a little bit more on the Clemson side than they do on the Georgia side, because Clemson has certainly seemed to regress from where it was back when it was a perennial playoff appearance team and a multiple national champion. There's a lot of questions kind of looming here of, is this still the same Clemson? Is this kind of what Clemson is? And for a lot of Clemson fans, they'd obviously love to believe, yeah, we're still the same. We're the same as we've always been. But if that is true, I think it's fair to ask, if Clemson is still Clemson, why are they acting so weird? And I don't know how closely you're paying attention to all of this, but I would say there are a couple of sort of minor controversies, seemingly self-induced, of just Clemson sort of acting like a program that's not quite at the perch that it once was and sort of flailing to figure out what it is right now. I'm going to take these in ascending order of importance. And to be completely honest with you, I'd say the first 2 things that I'm about to mention are more interesting than important. In other words, it's probably worth a conversation about, but it may not prove anything. But the kind of circumstantial evidence builds to something tangible. And the final of these 3 things I'm about to give you, I'd say, is the kind of thing that really does matter. It's the kind of thing that really does mean something. And so, therefore, all of this adds up to a program that's maybe just heading in the wrong direction. And obviously, that would be of crucial importance before Saturday's game. So let's start with this. This week, when the media arrived to the Clemson athletic facility to kind of cover the team and go through the press conferences and things like that, a normal Clemson tradition was upended. Clemson, I reckon, normally gives out a depth chart of their team and maybe their opponent for a given week. But obviously, Georgia doesn't do that kind of thing. I think the whole idea of depth charts are sort of overrated to begin with. You know, so-and-so starting or so-and-so starting. The truth is, for most of these programs, there's sort of an expected, positional value. In other words, Whoever starts at inside linebacker for Georgia is going to play like a Georgia inside linebacker. Whoever starts at safety for Georgia is going to play like a Georgia safety. It may be this dude or it may be that dude, but the level of play is pretty consistent over the course of years. And all teams have a positional value. Some teams obviously higher value than others because they're better teams. But whether it's this guy or the other guy, the overall performance is, fairly easy to predict because of how consistent a lot of teams are over the course of a period of years. But nonetheless, Georgia doesn't put that kind of thing out. We can make our best guesses as who's likely to start. And in most cases, we'll get a lot of those right because the online chatter, the people who know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody just sort of give us a little bit of an idea of that. But officially, Georgia doesn't reveal very much when it comes to stuff like that. So apparently that's sort of gotten under the skin of Clemson coach Dabo Swinney and the people who are running the Clemson program. Because if you're watching on video, I want to show this on the screen here for a moment. This is what Clemson media got yesterday. They got the depth chart, and it's completely blank. And a guy named John Blau, who covers Clemson for the Charleston Post and Courier, shared this. He says, here's your depth chart for Clemson, Georgia. So on the Clemson side, where normally you'd have like the two deep, the starters, the backup, things like that, the release from the Clemson media staff says, Clemson's initial depth chart for the 2024 season will be available at Mercedes-Benz Stadium on game day. In other words, we're not giving it out today. We're not doing that. The reason why? Well, that's found on the flip side of this depth chart, on the right side, where it says, for Georgia, please see Georgia's game notes for details and insights on team personnel. So there you go. Some sort of minor league pettiness here. Since Georgia's not putting out a depth chart, we're not going to put one out either. Now, the truth is Clemson's well within its rights not to put out a depth chart. Georgia doesn't do that kind of stuff, so Clemson's well within its rights not to do that. But here's the one thing I would suggest, and maybe I'm wrong, but here's the one thing I would suggest. If you're doing something simply because of what Georgia's doing, then you're just sort of playing a reactionary game, and that doesn't feel very alpha to me. That doesn't feel like the big team in the game if all you're doing is a reaction to what Georgia has done. You're watching Georgia so closely and reacting on the basis of that. It seems sort of petty and it seems sort of small. Now, I told you, we're doing all of this in sort of an ascending order of importance. So in the grand scheme of things, Clemson not releasing a depth chart is not that big of a deal. But it is, to me, a small sign of a program that's a little bit on edge right now and a little bit, ornery about kind of what their pecking order is currently in college football, perhaps compared to what it once was. And so if that's a small deal, let me give you a slightly larger deal just for a moment. We also learned this week, I guess yesterday, that Dabo Swinney is no longer going to be taking calls on his radio show anymore. Let me show you this on the screen there as well. As reported by Clemson people, a guy named Chapel Fowler says, it's official. Clemson football coach Dabo Swinney will no longer take live calls from fans on his weekly radio show. The new format used to be called Tiger Calls, and now it's just simply called Tiger Sports Hour with Dabo Swinney. Fans will be able to submit questions to him via text or email, and the first show airs at 8 o'clock on 105.5 The Roar. So obviously the subtext there is if all you're doing is sending social media messages, it's very easy to edit those and kind of sort of sift through and screen them carefully for the kinds of stuff that you want to be, talking about. So all of a sudden, Dabo Swinney's running from Clemson fans, not taking phone calls anymore. Now, once again, to be completely fair as I possibly can, most coaches don't take phone calls on their coach's show anyway. Goodness knows Kirby Smart would never do that and has never done that. So Dabo Swinney, I think, is taking a little bit of unfair heat for the fact that he's no longer taking calls on his radio show, given the fact that in this day and age, so few coaches do that. Some coaches still do, but a lot of coaches don't. Majority probably don't anymore. And so the fact that Dabo is joining the majority and saying, man, I ain't letting these people criticize me and ask me questions, the fact that he's doing that, probably taking a little bit of unfair criticism for it. But once again, the fact that he needs to, the fact that a two-time national champion and a guy who's taken Clemson to program heights it had never experienced prior to this can no longer speak to his fans in an unfettered platform, in an unfettered, kind of atmosphere here, is a little bit of an idea that things are getting a little bit weird around Clemson. Many of you remember what it was that was sort of the preceding incident that led to Dabo Swinney saying, hey, no more phone calls from these idiots. I'm not talking to these people on the phone anymore because of what they do to me. You'll remember last year when the infamous Tyler from Spartanburg, I believe we talked about this on DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro at the time. Tyler from Spartanburg went in on Dabo. And the whole thing is like several minutes long. For the purposes of our thing here, I've shortened this down a little bit from Tyler, a little bit from Dabo. The actual exchange was much longer and much more intense than what I'm about to play for you. But just for some context, here is why Clemson is acting so weird right now, and Dabo is perhaps acting so weird right now, because a year ago you had Clemson fans getting after Dabo like this. Take a listen to Tyler from Spartanburg.
Make the same amount of money as you do. You make 11.5. I appreciate everything you said, Coach Swinney. It sounded a whole lot like Tommy Bowden. And I'll tell you one thing, Tommy Bowden didn't make the same amount of money as you do. You make $11.5 million a year. That's second in college football, if I'm not mistaken. I'm curious why that salary has led to a 4-4.
What's this guy's name?
Tyler.
Hey, Tyler. I've listened to enough of you, Tyler. Listen, you can have all your opinions that you want. All right. I don't know how old you are. Don't really care. All right. But let me tell you something. We won 11 games last year, and you're part of the problem, to be honest with you, because that is part of the problem. It's people like you that all you do is the appreciation. The expectation is greater than the appreciation.
So once again, that's heavily edited by me to give you a little taste of Tyler from Spartanburg and a little taste from Dabo Swinney. It was a year ago, several minutes of back and forth there, and now Dabo Swinney apparently feels like he can no longer take calls on his coach's show because of how intense the criticism is from some Clemson fans. Once again, not necessarily the biggest thing in the world, but it all adds up to, as I've described, sort of a weird vibe around Clemson where fans aren't very happy. Clemson seems to be somewhat reactionary in comparison to the opponent, Georgia, of, oh, they're not giving it a depth chart, therefore we're not doing that either, essentially allowing themselves to be led around by whatever Georgia's choosing to do here. This does not feel like a program right now that's standing on a very firm footing. Now, I told you, we're going to go in ascending order of importance. So now let me get to some real, actionable, tangible proof that stuff around Clemson's pretty weird right now. You may not care about the depth chart. You may or may not care about Dabo Swinney taking heat from Clemson fans and not wanting to take phone calls anymore. But what is the constituency in college athletics that matters more than anybody else? The truth is, it's probably not the fans. It's actually the future players to a program. The recruits are the ones who matter the most of anything. They're also kind of, I believe, always the first to sort of know if things are good with the program or if things are trending in the wrong direction. Recruits know because they are invited to see the inside of a program. They see the program at its best. They sometimes see it at its worst. And their opinion matters more than anything else, more than Tyler and Spartanburg, more than me, more than you. It's the recruits who just sort of have a little bit of an idea of, is this a place I can trust with my life for the next 3 to 4 years? And with that in mind, another really weird thing has happened around Clemson in the last couple of days. Do you remember the guy Bryce Davis? We've talked about him a good bit. He's from North Carolina, sort of an edge rushing type guy. At one point in time was sort of on Georgia's radar, perhaps, as kind of an edge rusher for this class of 2025. But Davis eventually committed to Clemson. And yet this week, Davis made what I would describe as a very unorthodox choice. Let me show you this on the screen. Unorthodox, first of all, because Dabo Swinney, to his credit, doesn't have very many flips. That once guys commit to Clemson, for the most part, they have a tendency to stay committed to Clemson. That's just sort of always been the way. But when they do decommit from Clemson, it's usually because they are going to a major program, the likes of which that's competing for national championships. But this week, the 4-star edge rusher Bryce Davis, he flipped his commitment away from Clemson, but it wasn't to go to Georgia or Alabama or Ohio State or some program like this. As Hayes Fawcett from On3 reported, 4-star edge rusher Bryce Davis this week flipped his commitment from Clemson to Duke. What? Clemson's now losing recruits to Duke? The 6'4", 255-pound edge from Greensboro, North Carolina, had been committed to the Tigers since July. And now he's going to Duke. And we're led to believe a big NIL bag may be part of the reason why. But whatever the story behind the story is, the truth is Clemson just lost a recruit to Duke. And the coach, Dabo Swinney, is so scared of his own fans that after a long tradition of taking phone calls during his coach's show, he now no longer feels he can do that. And they're afraid to put out a depth chart because Georgia's not putting one out. And all of this just sort of adds up to, as I said before, a weird vibe around the program as it gets ready to take on Georgia on Saturday. So, to me, the biggest question in this game going into Saturday is, because one way or another, we sort of know what Georgia is. Maybe they're the absolute best of themselves, or maybe they're slightly less than that, but we sort of have an idea of what the Georgia standard is right now. But on the flip side, can Clemson come close to matching that? Does Clemson have a chance as about a 2-touchdown underdog here? Do they have a chance to keep this game competitive if they're losing recruits to Duke, and if their fans are all over Dabo, and if everything about this program sort of feels a little bit reactionary and sort of responding to whatever stimulus is out there? I'm not quite so sure. I think the closer we get to this game, the more Georgia fans ought to have a pretty high level of confidence. Not because Georgia can't be beaten. Obviously, anybody can. But if it happens here this year, it seems like it's likely to occur against a team that's less weird than Clemson currently is. Things around Clemson are pretty strange right now, and I'm not quite so sure Dabo Swinney has what it takes to correct that. On Saturday, we'll find out a little bit more. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. We're glad you're with us, no matter how you get to us. Video 10 a.m. And by the way, for our live audience, starting now at 9:50, giving you 10 minutes of comments and having a good time doing that prior to the start of the big show. That is always a lot of fun, and it's been great to see the response to that here thus far. Also, radio, Athens Sports Radio 960 Ref, podcasts, wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. So glad you're finding our show wherever you're finding, and incredibly grateful to our friends at ServPro, who make it all possible. You know, ServPro steps up and serves you, and I love that name, Serve. They step up to serve you in a time of great need. If you've had your home or your commercial property or maybe your rental property that you depend on for some passive income, if that's been damaged by fire or water intrusion or some sort of mess that needs to be cleaned up, the folks at ServPro, they're restoration specialists. They can restore your property to a condition just like it was prior to whatever just happened. And if something like that happens, that's, of course, what you want. You want it back like it was before. You want it to look like it never even happened. And that is what ServPro does for you. They get it cleaned up, they get it fixed up, they get it put back together like it never even happened. Every ServPro franchise, independently owned and operated. So when fire or water damage strikes you, reach out to our friends at ServPro immediately. Don't hesitate. Get in line to make that call here today and find out what they can do for you. Let the ServPro restoration specialists do their magic touch and their work, and they'll take great care of you. Find them online, servpro.com, S-E-R-V, servpro.com for more on that. All right, quick message here. We're getting down to the wire. Final moments of that DawgNation Invasion tailgate. In fact, I want to kind of hold off on this and tell you more about that here coming up in just a little bit. Down to the wire on some final moments on that. We'll tell you more about that here coming up in just a little bit. Also, special guest on the program here today. Happy to, in addition to Connor Riley, who's going to join us here coming up in a couple of moments, happy to welcome on the former Georgia linebacker Davin Bellamy. Speaking of edge rushers, terrific former edge rusher for UGA, one of the real catalysts for the first big-time breakthrough season for Georgia back in 2017. Davin always a very interesting personality, outspoken guy. We're going to talk some Georgia football with Davin Bellamy today before the show is done. I'm really very excited about that. But prior to that, let's go around the doghouse. Presented today by our friends at Georgia Safe Retirement Planners. Really looking forward to what's going to happen on Saturday for Georgia against Clemson. But if you want to have some concern about this from the Georgia front, obviously player availability, a little bit of an issue there. Some of this related to injury. Some of this related to, the continual chatter, if you know people who know people who know people, the idea that Trevor Etienne may not play, that Smile Monda may not play. You don't have to look very far, maybe in your own life, to find somebody who sort of feels like they got some inside info, perhaps saying something along those lines. Obviously, that's a little bit of a concern. The injury situation lingering. Roderick Robinson confirmed by Kirby Smart yesterday. Yes, he indeed, as you've been told, have the surgery that puts Robinson on a little bit of a timeline for recovery. And all of that probably adds up to a little bit of a question, a little bit of a concern of, well, gosh, who does Georgia have available to them on Saturday? Well, when Connor Riley joins us here in a moment, I'm going to ask him more about the injury front here. But as I sort of set that up, I wanted to kind of take a little bit of a different twist on this just for a moment. Let's kind of look at this from a sort of positive lens here just for a bit. In other words, we can talk a lot about who might not play or who may try to play but not be 100%, things like that. But let's put a positive spin on this just for a bit. There was a guy that we were told the other day, a little bit banged up for Georgia, slowed down in practice, and that's a guy I think a lot of us are kind of hoping can be a major part of the wide receiver situation for Georgia here this year. I'm talking about Colbie Young. Well, yesterday, in the midst of a lot of kind of injury updates and trying to sift through and figure out what all this means, I don't want you to miss this positive update that Georgia may be getting Colbie Young back at exactly the right time as Georgia gets ready for a high-profile game against Clemson. Here is a good update from Kirby Smart on Young's status ahead of this game.
Yeah, Colbie's been great. He's ever since the scrimmage, not this Saturday, we didn't scrimmage, the Saturday before that, he's been able to get out there and run and do some things he practiced ever since we started on Clemson full go. So he's been great, should be ready to go.
So I think that's good news. To me, Colbie Young sort of feels like the kind of player that ought to maybe get a touchdown in a game like this, right? We've seen him be a valuable red zone target. We know what he's capable of there. A guy that, on G-Day was pretty strong when it comes to third down there too. Feels like Saturday could be a pretty nice day for Colbie Young. So to think that he's back healthy and ready to go, man, I think that's really good news. You'd love to see him a part of all this. Also, let me give you another positive update for a minute here, too. We're now kind of dealing with the fact that Roderick Robinson's more banged up than a lot of us would probably like for him to be. And we don't know Trevor Etienne's status in the game either for a completely different reason. But, man, the story of Branson Robinson for Georgia continues to be a good one. The hard work that he's done, both spiritually, mentally, obviously physically, to come back from the injury that took him off the field in 2023, man, it all feels like that's culminating in a kind of a pretty special return for him for Georgia on Saturday, and the kind of thing that just gives you a lot of really feel-good vibes. And on the subject of sort of positive things related to injury, Kirby Smart also gave you a little bit of an update about that as well.
It's been a process. I mean, the kid was down in the dumps because he was having a great camp last year. The injury happened, and he wasn't with the rest of the team for a lot of the time. He had to break away, go about things a different way, spent a lot of time in the training room. That is a grueling injury to go through and work all the way back to the point where he didn't get to go through all of spring. He did a lot of things in spring, but he didn't get to go through that in spring. So this fall camp's been big for him in terms of confidence. He's gained confidence through special teams. He's gained confidence through reps. But he had a good body of work before. So it wasn't like he didn't have that entire freshman year where he took a lot of reps on that 2022 season.
I think Georgia fans already know this. They're a pretty sharp, bunch, generally speaking. But to me, it sort of feels like one of those things, and I probably expect this probably will happen. When Robinson gets his first carry, and who knows, it may be the first carry for Georgia this season. There's at least a chance that's true. Boy, don't you think he ought to get a thunderous level of applause and a huge ovation for the work that he's done to come back and the fact that he is seemingly healthy for Georgia at a time in which you need some healthy running backs. You need as many bodies in that room as you can, just given the uncertain status for a couple of others. The fact that Robinson has sort of worked so hard to put himself in this position at this point, my guess is he gets a pretty strong reaction from Georgia fans, and I would say well-deserved there. So there's plenty of concern about who might not play for Georgia on Saturday, and some of that's well-founded. We'll talk to Connor Riley more about that in a moment. But Colbie Young, seems like you're getting him back at a good time here. Branson Robinson deserves to be lauded for the work that he's done to be back here in this position. So it's not all bad news for Georgia on the injury front, and sort of worth pointing that out there. as a part of Around the Doghouse. Presented today by our friends at Georgia Safe Retirement Planners. And obviously, when it comes to your retirement, the one thing you want to know, is my money safe? Am I well taken care of here? And that's what Georgia Safe Retirement Planners is all about, giving you the peace of mind to know that the comfortable retirement you deserve is possible. They provide this through a truly free, no-obligation retirement planning service with no upfront risk to you. You can generate up to 50% more in retirement income at a fraction of the cost that you might pay if you're working with somebody else. And you'll never have to worry about outliving your savings in retirement. So take advantage of what our friends at Georgia Safe Retirement Planners can do for you, accurately forecasting your future retirement income up to 20 years into the future, making sure that you can achieve your retirement goals. What a great thing that is, and how much fun is it to have our friends at Georgia Safe Retirement Planners as a part of DawgNation Daily here today. So we're excited about everything going on with Georgia and Clemson coming up on Saturday, with the show, all the shows this week, and sort of getting ready for all of this. I told you later on today, getting a chance to hear from Davin Bellamy. That's going to be a lot of fun. Also tomorrow, another special guest. First time for us on the show. ESPN's Marty Smith going to be with us tomorrow. He's got some thoughts on what's going to go down Georgia Clemson. He sort of knows the SEC, knows the ACC, big figure down here in the South. So Marty Smith on the show tomorrow too. That's going to be a lot of fun. But for now, how healthy is Georgia? What to expect versus Clemson and everything else? Let's talk to Connor Riley here today. DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
So a lot of news coming out of the Kirby Smart press conference yesterday from the perspective of a Georgia fan. Unfortunately, more of that on the injury availability front than you perhaps would have liked. So it is there. We will start with Connor Riley here right now. Connor, given the preponderance of all this, chatter about Warren Branson or Rod Robinson or all these guys right now, how healthy do you think Georgia is going into this game on Saturday?
Certainly more so than I think they have been in years past. You can think back to, past times. Darnell Washington, Tyke Smith missing the 2021 game because of foot injuries that they had. I think all things considered, like Roger Robinson wasn't going to be a starter for this team. Yes, he was going to play an important role, but Trevor Etienne, this first game notwithstanding, is expected to be Georgia's leading ball carrier. Jordan Hall and Xavier McLeod thought to be nice players, rotation pieces on the defensive line, but they were going to be behind Warren Brinson, Nas Stackhouse, and Christian Miller there. And then you've got, Jared Wilson sounds like he's good to go at the center position there. So for a Georgia program that practices as physical as anyone in, gladiator type setting in Sanford Stadium during some of these scrimmages, as having getting to see some of them. I think that this is a Georgia team that this is probably about as healthy as we can reasonably expect. Now, where it gets complicated is, will Trevor Etienne be suspended for this game? Will Small Munden be suspended for this game? If we knew the answers to that, we'd have, I think, a much better idea of the overall strength of this Georgia team heading into this first game.
So I've said this, if it were me, I'd play them. I think in the case of both these guys, they seem like they're using the legal system the same way anybody else would, a civilian non-football player would. And I don't see any obvious reason that they shouldn't play, but it's hard to deny the online chatter or the people in our lives who sort of know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody would seem to suggest they're probably not going to. What do you make of that?
Right now, I would say that I think Trevor Etienne is more likely to not play than Small Munden, because even though while Munden did have the racing charge that was ultimately dismissed, there was the presence of alcohol when it comes to Trevor Etienne's arrest. He did plead guilty to a minor in possession charge there. And so I think because of that, I think that casts more doubt on Etienne's status in that regard. I'm not here to debate whether these guys should or should not play. That is not up to me. That is ultimately up to Kirby Smart in those regards there. From my understanding and talking to people around the program, and this is in part why I asked the question in the way in which I did at the press conference yesterday, trying to find out, does Georgia know, does Kirby Smart know if they're going to be available, sort of who is making the decision on this? I don't necessarily believe that this all falls on Kirby Smart. I think that this goes up higher in the food chain, in part because of, I think, everything else that has happened in the past 2 years when it comes to this Georgia program and the driving related arrest. In a vacuum, should a racing and reckless driving charge from Small Munden get him suspended? No, I don't believe so. But I think when you factor in everything else that has gone on with this program, it does change certain things in that regard. So I think right now, as we sit here, I think ETN is the more unlikely of the two to play. I would not be surprised if both play. I would not be surprised if either is suspended. I will say one thing that I would be very surprised at is if we get any clarity on this even before the game, because last year, and I just had a story go up on DawgNation about this, like Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint dressed out for that first game, but he did not play at all. So just because Trevor Etienne is dressed out on Sunday, just because Small Munden is potentially dressed out on Saturday as well, it does not mean that they're going to step out there on the field. This is going to be something we're going to monitor and follow all the way through the course of the game.
I think it's a really important point to keep in mind is that we may not get that visual cue about their status, or it could be a false positive where they're dressed and they don't play. Really important to keep that in mind as we start looking down on the field to kick things off on game day. I said before you joined us, I think there are a lot of weird vibes around Clemson right now. And all of this individually doesn't necessarily mean all that much. Not releasing a depth chart because Georgia's not releasing one, or Dabo Swinney no longer taking calls in his radio show. A lot of that kind of stuff is sort of somewhat silly, a little bit goofy, but it does sort of speak to a program that's sort of flailing about right now, a coach that's now unpopular enough that calls are no longer, a good idea. And the biggest thing of all, a guy like Bryce Davis flipping from Clemson to go to Duke. That's the kind of thing that major programs don't have happen to them very much. And in years past, Dabo almost never had decommitments from the program, just the kind of thing that didn't happen very much. I think that Clemson comes into Saturday's game in a pretty weird place. Weird enough that I just don't think they're capable of being competitive with Georgia. I think this game is more likely to be what we typically see from Georgia against a ranked non-conference opponent than something like what we saw last year against Georgia Tech, for instance, where it was surprisingly closer than experts thought that it would be. I just don't know that Clemson has what it takes anymore, and I think some of the stuff this week would sort of point to that being true. Do you agree with me about sort of a strange vibe around Clemson here at the moment?
Look, I'll ask the question. Is Dabo ducking Tyler from Spartanburg?
Sure.
Is he afraid to face the tough questions in that regard? No, I would agree with you that the way Clemson is going about these things is weird. And it sort of speaks to the pressure that Dabo Swinney is under. And, him being the egocentric driven person that I think he is in the wake of winning those first two national titles. In a way, I think that kind of gave him this belief that maybe he was perhaps unimpeachable when it comes to the way that he could run the Clemson program. But the program, or the sport of college football, rather, has changed so much since Clemson won those national titles. NIL was not a legalized thing when Clemson was winning national titles. The transfer portal was not nearly, it was prevalent, obviously, but not to the degree that it is in this day and age, which is why I think you can understand Kirby's sentiment in agreeing with the way that Dabo goes about doing things when it comes to the transfer portal, but smart at the same time recognizing, hey, I got to try and play by these rules as well and do what is ultimately best for my program. This is a huge season for Clemson. There's no doubt about it, given, again, the last time they made the playoff was in 2020, a season I think most of us don't really tend to count because of the fact that there was just no defense played. Very different season overall. And the last time they won a playoff game was back in 2018 when they won the national championship. So I think it's just a very different Clemson program, and they're entering a time when, I know Florida State didn't look good on Saturday. There's going to be a lot of questions about the ACC. Say Florida finds a way to beat Miami, Georgia beats Clemson. Where is the top of this conference? And with Dabo in particular, like, this is a year in my mind that Clemson has to make the college football playoff. But because if they go like 9-4 again, and they have 4 regular season losses, they're going to be getting even further away from where they were. And a lot of that does fall on Dabo. And when you're as stubborn and as entrenched in your beliefs as Dabo has been, and you don't deliver those results, I think you open yourself up to a lot of criticism, which is what we have seen in the early parts of this week.
So we've got a lot more I want to talk to Connor Riley about here. Obviously, as Georgia gets ready for Clemson on Saturday, including a look at what's going to happen for Georgia in all of this. But I also want to remind you about our own personal DawgNation events as we're getting ready for all this. This is sort of our last call right now of people to be involved in the DawgNation Invasion tailgate. The response to this has been amazing here thus far, but this is your last chance to get in on that. So please go to DawgNation.com/tailgate. Reserve your spot right now to be a part of the tailgate, the all-inclusive experience, which has your food and your beverages. You want the Bloody Marys, the mimosas, the bacon, the sausage, the pastries, the muffins, all of that great stuff. If you want all of that, your time to get that is right now by going to DawgNation.com/tailgate. Secure your spot for that. And if you want to be a part of the VIP experience, the night before with our friends at Discover Dunwoody, you got your chance to do that right now there as well when you go to ATLSportstrips.com. Obviously, Atlanta Sports Trips, they are kind of powering our DawgNation Invasion events here this year. ATLSportstrips.com. You can book your VIP experience the night before. Stay right there in the Dunwoody area. A wonderful hotel experience. And then luxury motor coach over to the stadium, the tailgate there that morning. You watch the game. You hop back on the bus. You drive back. You're not worried about driving or anything like that. You get the one-night stay at the Hyatt Place Perimeter Center. Round-trip transportation from the hotel and back. And, of course, tickets to the DawgNation Invasion tailgate. Go to ATLSportstrips.com for the last call on your chance to book that VIP experience here today. Now, one more thing to remind you of, and then we'll get back to Connor here on all of this. Our friends at Atlanta Sports Trips are also doing something really cool here right now. They want to provide a giveaway for a pair of tickets to our DawgNation Invasion tailgate on Saturday. How much fun is that going to be? So you've got today and tomorrow to get in on this. We're going to announce the winner there on Thursday. So if you go to ATLSportstrips.com, you can be a part of the Clemson giveaway here. And if you want to just sort of find the full address here, it's ATLSportstrips.com/DawgNation-giveaway-Clemson. You can also go to DawgNation.com. There's a link for that right there, too, so you can pop in there and be a part of that. Just got to fill out a quick form, and then you can be registered for your chance to win. Maybe you and a guest could be coming to our DawgNation Invasion tailgate on Saturday by being a winner from our friends at ATL Sports Trip. So make sure you check that out. Fun stuff going down. Go to DawgNation.com. You can click the link. You can jump right in there. You can register for your chance to win the DawgNation Invasion giveaway, courtesy of our friends at ATL Sports Trips. And if you just want to guarantee your spot there, go ahead and get your tickets. Or if you want that VIP experience from our friends at Discover Dunwoody, take advantage of this last call to get involved on all of that today. All right, Connor, back to the subject of the Georgia Bulldogs here for a moment. The thing I think is the most interesting about Georgia right now, after a year ago in which Georgia got off to some very slow starts offensively, Kirby Smart acknowledged back during the spring they maybe were a little slow last year to sort of fully turn Carson Beck loose and sort of let him do what he could do. I'm very curious to see how fast of a start offensively Georgia gets off to on Saturday. In fact, I've sort of whittled this down in a very simple way. I want to see Georgia score 14 first-quarter points on Saturday. And if Georgia finds 14 in the first, that to me is a pretty good signal that this team really might be ready for one of those eye-popping performances, the likes of which they gave us in 2022 on a pretty regular basis. I think 14 first-quarter points would be a pretty interesting message on Saturday that this is a different team than the one to start the 2023 season was.
I don't think you're going to see that on Saturday. I hate to break your bubble there, BA, but I just think with Clemson and the way they're going to want to play, the way they're going to want to lean on Phil Mafah, their running back, they're going to want to try and shorten this game. I think that's a big reason why Georgia Tech was able to upset Florida State. Last week, they just shortened the game, 7 possessions for both teams in that game. And in that first quarter in particular, I think we saw a season ago, Georgia's going to want to defer. Deferring, in my mind, is the smart position to take there. Like, they might only have 1.5 possessions, or they might be midway through a second possession there. So 14 points, while I see and understand your logic and point there, I think Clemson wanting to shorten this game, which is kind of stunning just given where that Clemson program is and where it thought it was to be. Georgia and Clemson have each won 2 national championships in the past decade. But I think for us to talk about Clemson in the way that we are, about shortening the game, about trying to keep this low scoring, I think speaks to where this program ultimately is. And so to your point, if Georgia goes out there and starts fast, that's going to put Clemson in a world of hurt. I think you're right in large about the point you're making about Carson Beck. I think back to that Auburn game where, it was so stark, just the way that he played in the first half versus how he went out there and played in the second half. They really sort of turned him loose there, opened him up. And from that point on, I think we saw a different Carson last year. I think you're right to want to see something similar in that regard when it comes to Carson and how he goes about playing and starting fast, specifically with some of the questions that they have at the running back position.
Should be a fascinating thing to see. Connor, your coverage from Athens has been outstanding. I know we'll get a chance to hear from Kirby Smart again after practice tonight. Obviously, as those preparations for Clemson continue, and a whole lot of fun. You've got your show, DawgNation at Large, coming up later on this week, too, with our good friend Kaylee Manziel. So it's a busy week for DawgNation as we get ready for game day. Thanks for helping us out here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro, and we'll look forward to seeing you in person there on Saturday and throughout the week here on the DawgNation platforms.
Yeah, make sure you get those tickets to the DawgNation Invasion tailgate. Those tickets are going to be higher than a Chaperone ticket, higher than an Oasis ticket with those guys announcing they're being back. I know there's been some talk. I will be at the tailgate on Saturday. I don't know for how long, but I will be there, so make sure you stop on by.
Got a Noah and a Liam Gallagher reference from Connor Riley here today. Never would have expected that. Good stuff, Connor. We'll talk to you soon, all right?
As always, it was a pleasure.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So fun stuff there from Connor on all of that. And we're not done with great guests in the program here today. Also, the former Georgia linebacker Davin Bellamy going to join us here in just a little bit. A lot of folks having a good time with the program. And a lot of folks also having fun with Royal Caribbean there as well. Cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. We're getting ready to get rolling there with that. And, of course, everybody excited about all the fun stuff happening with Royal Caribbean here right now. And if you're watching on video, look at that gorgeous view of Utopia of the Seas, sailing there in the night and all the cool neighborhood. That's the Boardwalk neighborhood that you're seeing right there. And one of the things I love about the Boardwalk neighborhood is it's the place where Playmaker Sports Bar and Grill is located on the ship, which is always really fun. You've also got the Ultimate Abyss, which is the tallest slide at sea. You've got that there on the ship there as well. You got the carousel there too. And to me, it's an example of what Royal Caribbean does so well, is that Royal Caribbean makes its vacation experiences sort of a good thing for everybody, including families. And for me, obviously, this is something that is especially important for me because I have a family. I got young kids. And so all the cool stuff they do to make the experience great for the full family. Moms and dads got stuff they love, food, beverage, things like that, entertainment. But the kids got plenty of stuff to do there, too. It's just one of the things that makes a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation unlike anything else you're going to get anywhere. And so I think it's time for you to book a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. Jessica Slater can tell you how. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. She can tell you about Utopia of the Seas, Icon of the Seas, all the other great things that Royal Caribbean's got going on. She can tell you about all of that. All right, let's talk about cruising around the SEC here coming up for a couple of moments. Interesting post on the X platform yesterday from Ole Miss coach Lane Kiffin. At first blush, this sort of looks to be a little bit of a troll, if you will. So Lane Kiffin tweets out this story from ESPN. Headline, How Ohio State Built a $20 million National Championship or Bust Roster. Now, it is certainly true that if I'm Ohio State, and if I'm Ryan Day in particular with my, obviously fake beard, dyed with an unnatural color of black here, if that's me, I probably don't like this attention from ESPN. It's probably not quite the sort of preseason storyline that I'm looking for. Kiffin retweeting this out would seem to be a little bit of a sort of stir in the pot thing a little bit. And to a certain extent, that's probably what he's doing, I guess, maybe a little bit. But I also think that Lane Kiffin, y'all know I'm not always the biggest Kiffin fan. I think he's a little bit of an inflated personality around the sport with a very small resume to back some of that kind of stuff up. But the one thing I do think Kiffin's really good at, and people within the sport of college football will tell you this, is that Kiffin has proven himself to be a very good leader of an organization that's become very good at raising money. You can go look at some of the media reports about this. Ole Miss has raised a lot of NIL dollars, and it has done so in a pretty creative way, a number of creative ways. And so some of this from Kiffin is not just trolling Ryan Day, although some of it might be. Some of this is also the fact that, hey, you know how much money we have raised? This is sort of him saying my goal, my aspiration is to raise even more. I don't know how good of a football coach Lane Kiffin is, to be completely honest with you. But it seems like he's probably pretty good at sort of cultivating donors behind the scenes, and that's a big part of the job here right now. Speaking of high-profile coaches, and not always for the right reasons, saw where Jimbo Fisher was out there this week. acknowledging the fact that, I believe this was on the Feinbaum show, acknowledging the fact that he'd like to coach again, that he's maybe going to get bored just sort of sitting around and counting his money and doing all that kind of stuff. He'd like to be out there and he'd like to be coaching again. Man, I don't know about that. And some of y'all know that one of my wrongest takes of all time has been that I thought that Jimbo Fisher would be a big winner at Texas A&M, bringing a national championship pedigree to College Station. I thought that'd work out, very well. And it obviously didn't. And I think we're still finding out just how bad he was at A&M because the quarterback that he had, Haynes King, did y'all see how good he was for Georgia Tech on Saturday? He didn't do any of that stuff at College Station. Seemed incapable of doing that kind of thing with the Aggies. And at Georgia Tech, with Buster Faulkner running the offense, he's just achieving heights previously thought unimaginable. How bad of a coach is Jimbo Fisher if that's what guys do once they leave Jimbo Fisher? So I'm sure he'll coach again somewhere. But as a major level coach, my guess is Jimbo's probably about done. I'll also mention this here real quick. A couple of the high-profile games on Saturday. We'll obviously talk plenty more about like A&M and Notre Dame and stuff like that, Florida, Miami. There are a couple of other games that I'm watching for a little bit on Saturday. I kind of want to see what Tennessee looks like. They're only playing Chattanooga, but I want to see Nico in that spot. Nico Imaleva. Obviously, we saw him start the bowl game against Iowa. To be fair in that game, he probably ran it better than he threw it. His overall yards per attempt number when he put the ball in the air wasn't that great. I'm looking to see how Nico throws it on Saturday. I think that could be pretty interesting. SEC debuts for Texas and Oklahoma, both against weak opponents. That should be somewhat interesting. So even beyond the sort of major games, I think there's still a lot to watch for from the SEC on Saturday. And for now, we'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And here on DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro, we also get a chance to talk to one of my favorites from the early days of the Kirby Smart era, one of the guys who helped lay the foundation for the national championship program that Georgia became. It's Davin Bellamy here on the program today. Davin, welcome in. I appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for your time. It's great to have you on the show.
Yes, sir, and I appreciate those kind words, man. Happy to be here. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
So a lot of us have so many fond memories of your 2017 season, what your team accomplished, making the college football playoff, and in particular, the humble yourself line to Baker Mayfield at the end of that game. Right. How much do Georgia fans still bring that up to you? Because I think for a lot of us, listen, when you're competing whether it's as players or even the fans sort of competing as fan base against each other, every now and then a guy just sort of gets on your nerves. Georgia fans did not like Baker Mayfield. They were so happy that you gave the sort of humble yourself line to him. How much do people still bring that up to you?
Man, I get that all the time, across, all my platforms. And, I started a construction company, last year. So I say about a month ago, I was going to get a quote in a house. And I was walking upstairs to look at the attic, and I walked past the room, and it was a kid, looked like he was like mid-20s, and he saw me walk by, and he was like, "Oh, bro, you don't even remember? I saw you in a Buckhead bar, and I yelled out, humble yourself to you." So, but I get that, all the time. I was a very special run, that we went on, and it had a lot of sound bites to it also.
We talked about this at the time, you kind of were doing this in what we sort of think of as the sort of pre-NIL era. I'm sure as a businessman, it's not lost on you that if you had a catchphrase like that at a time in which it was just maybe a little bit more accepted to kind of be out there sort of promoting your stuff. I mean, I know you sold T-shirts, and a lot of Georgia fans got them, and you may still be selling them. But if you're doing that in the kind of NIL age we're living in now, your chance to kind of profit from that could have been obviously so much higher, right?
Man, huge. And what people don't even know is that whole situation was honestly on Skip Bayless and Shannon Sharp's show. It's on Undisputed. So it had gained so much attention. Even TMZ picked it up because they thought that somehow I was getting funds from the clothing and it was illegal, blah, blah, blah. So TMZ even, aired the story. So it took off, man. But, we was a year too late. But luckily, don't know if you heard the news. They said something about that NIL, back pay from guys from 2016 to now. And if you played in the, Power 5, then, that's at least starting off at a pretty hefty number. So hopefully a lot of guys from my class and, those guys that couldn't, take advantage of those things get some type of back pay, because around that 2017 time, we kind of seen the narrative about to change. You always have the conversations of should college, players be paid, should they not? But around 2017, 2018, those things started looking forward. So a lot of us kind of got into that social media marketing thing just because it was more, acceptable. And now that guys can make money off that, it's tremendous. But I hope, we get some type of back pay for it.
Hey, I like that. Yeah, listen, you got to go get that money. I like that
for sure.
Obviously, you loved getting after quarterbacks, and that's something that you're very good at. And Georgia's got a bunch of guys right now that are sort of hoping to take the next step in that regard. Have you had much of a chance to watch guys like Mikael Williams and some of the guys, Damon Wilson? What do you think of what Georgia's trying to do off the edge here right now?
Most definitely. With Mikael, I've been knowing Mikael since really his senior year in high school. He trained with my trainer, Des, out of Gwinnett, who learned from Chuck Smith. And I ended up working with Chuck Smith since I was at Georgia to now. And me and Mikael had some sessions. And I remember my trainer, Des, Walker, he was calling me and say, I got this kid that's going to Georgia. He's big time. I just want you to come in and, train with him, just chop it up with him and kind of tell him how good Georgia is. So I've been on Kel for a long time. I love what Georgia has, on the edge. I think for them to take the next step, and what I'm looking for is more four-man rush. A lot of things that we do at Georgia are very exotic on third down. That's why the sack numbers are always, broken up in fives. Your defensive end may have 5, your inside linebacker may have 5, your D tackle may have 4, your corner, your safety may have 3 or 4. So we do a lot of exotic things on third down to expose the blocking, assignments. So this year, sometimes, when you got just those good edges, sometimes you just tell them to let them go. So I'm interested to see, this weekend. I just want to see Kale just go and those guys just go, off the edge and let them trust their pass rushing to get there versus the exotic packages.
And we'll finish with this. Obviously we're entering into a 12-team playoff world. The SEC's tougher now because you got Texas and Oklahoma. Right. The Georgia schedule may be the toughest they've played ever in a regular season than I can remember. How well set up do you think Georgia is for a tougher SEC, a longer playoff, and just a national landscape where Ohio State's out there or, Alabama wants to stay in it with Kalen DeBoer? How well set up do you think Georgia is for this season?
Definitely with all the senior leadership we have, coming back, those guys, they know how to, prepare their bodies for a long season, and the season is even longer now if you want to go to the national championship. But, first, the off the field things, just, preparing the body, the leadership, taking it one game at a time. So in the aspect of the maturity, of the team, I think we're all there. And of course, the talent. But kind of, like you mentioned, there's so much competition in the SEC now. I think health and depth will be the thing that, separates teams, especially when it gets down to the end. But, we have a senior quarterback and Carson Beck who's not going to put the offense in bad, situations simply because, he's seen it all and he plays on environment. So I think with all the, competition, whatever team has that senior leadership and that foundation will take the next step. And I think Georgia has that. Texas is fresh in the SEC. And before even the mix, happened, the SEC was tough, to get out of. Even when I was playing, you could never take your foot off the gas. A Vanderbilt game that only holds, 30,000
Yeah.
and you playing them at 11 a.m.
Yeah.
Could be pretty tough. So even now, this is a every week thing. I just think it's going to come down to one, taking it a game at a time and realizing that every week in the SEC is a season in its own. So you can't be too high. You can't be too low. You just got to ride it out. And like we used to say, chop wood and carry water. And that culture has been passed down for a long time. And I think the guys now, it's embedded in their DNA. And a lot of teams don't have that. So I think that is our way of, just edging out, above these teams.
I love it, Davin. I think that's really well said. Hey, you mentioned your social media. People want to find you online. How can they find some of the stuff you got going on here these days?
Still the same Instagram and, IG from, college. My, construction company is, One Love, construction. So you can Google that. We're doing really well. It's something that I enjoy doing. It's kind of like managing a defense, but you're just managing, people, and I love it. So, but yeah, man, I still got the same platforms from back in college. So, Davin Bellamy 17, just give me a follow.
Hey, man, it's really a great pleasure to speak to you here today. As I said before, we're fans of you, and glad to have you a part of the show, and hopefully get a chance to do this sometime soon.
Likewise, man. Looking forward to it, man. Thank you, and go Dogs.
Go Dogs, indeed. Good stuff there from Davin Bellamy.
All right, now.
How much fun is that to have him on the program here today? Really, really good stuff from a guy that was, listen, we've said this before, him, Lorenzo on the defensive side, obviously Nick and Sony on the offensive side, Jake Fromm, our good friend, Roquan Smith, pillars that built a program that would win 2 national championships. And you don't get 2021 and 2022 without those guys who are putting it on the line in 2017. As he said, that's back when, keep chopping wood. Y'all remember that? I mean, it starts to feel like a little while ago now, but that was some of the good stuff from the early days of Kirby Smart. Man, really, really good stuff there from Davin Bellamy. Let me give a quick shout-out before we wrap things up here today. Our friends at Mr. Rooter got you taken care of when it comes to whole home water filtration and all the great things that go on with drain cleaning, repair work, any kind of thing to your water heater, all kinds of just sort of regular plumbing issues. Our friends at Mr. Rooter got you covered on all of that. They're going to address your plumbing needs as quickly as possible. Residential, commercial, everything else in between. They work on plumbing all day, every day. That means they're experts there in that field. So you can count on them. Upfront pricing, flexible service options, and, of course, exceptional customer service. And at Mr. Rooter, there's a $29 service fee that's waived anytime you get some repair work done. So please find them online, MrRooterGeorgia.com. That is MrRooterGeorgia.com. So for our golden shoe today, I want to send a special thank you out. A listener to our program, his name is Mitt Layton. Now, Mitt's been he's attended our DawgNation cruises. A great guy. Really appreciate him. But also, how about this? And this just, I tell y'all, you'll never know what this means to me. So Mitt Layton wrote into me to say that he had ServPro doing a pretty big job for him in there at his house because of us touting them as a sponsor. He says, I told them that I learned about them through DawgNation. So y'all gonna understand something. This is how I feed my family. This is how I just provide a life to the people that I love more than anything in the world. And so when you show up and you watch the show or you listen to the show and then you reach out and you say nice things to our sponsors, when you allow them to provide that service for you, I mean, grateful is not even close to a strong enough word to say what that means to me. So Mitt, thank you so much. ServPro, thanks for taking care of our people there as well. Lousy, stinking Gators, no thanks going out to you, other than, I guess, being a doormat every fall to us these days. It's been 1,389 days since Florida has beaten Georgia. That is our Gator Hater Updater. We'll see all of you back tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust R.S. Andrews on all of that today. So, first of all, how great was Davin Bellamy? How much fun was that on the program here today? The terrific former Dawg, wonderful personality. You love that from Davin Bellamy. If you want to bring down the cool, there we go. Gotta get the moneymaker back on the screen here. I say that in full jest. But how great was Davin Bellamy? So much fun with Davin here today. Loved that. And by the way, speaking of great guests, as I was speaking to Davin Bellamy, I just got an interesting piece of information to the old phone here. As I told you before, we have not been able to connect as of late. Not anybody's fault. He's just been busy because Terrence Edwards is a football coach now, head coach at Mount Vernon, off to a great start here this season. But Terrence did let me know, and I haven't had a chance to respond back to him yet, but I did hear this, that Terrence should be able to start joining the programming. And he sort of figured his schedule out, kind of worked that out, going to be able to join the program again. So we may have Terrence maybe as soon as this week. We'll find out. But how exciting is that to get Terrence Edwards back on DawgNation Daily? We're certainly looking forward to that. And by the way, speaking of our R.S. Andrews cooldown, also excited about the fact that the R.S. Andrews Go With The Flow returns on Friday there as well. In fact, bigger and better than it's ever been before. In fact, some of that may even find its way to the cooldown here on Friday. So we're just going to have a great time on all of that. But for now, though, it's your comments that we want to get. I'm going to start on Facebook here. We'll find out what everybody's got going on. We'll take a few comments and kind of roll into a Tuesday, getting closer to that game week. If I can type, I will get in, and we'll see if we can get going. Now we're in here. All right, on Facebook, let's find out what's happening over here. Ken Holcomb says, good to see Davin Bellamy again. I had wondered about him a few times. Yeah, listen, I tell you, just a terrific personality and a lot of fun on the show here today. Let's see what else. Brian Lindsay on the subject of the Peter Millar shirts. I do like those. And I did get a new one last year in time for the start of the season. Can I get a new one here or a set of new ones, handful of new ones? We'll have to see about that. It would certainly be good news if I could. It would certainly be good news if I could. Jamie Huff says, Clemson people are calling us weak if we let ETN play. I'm like, idiots, I'm not the coach. I don't feel bad if he plays. He said, furthermore, your mama. So Jamie Huff letting you know how he feels about Clemson fans. And this is sort of the point that I was making about, Clemson, I guess, always puts out a depth chart, but this week they didn't because Georgia's not. To me, that's an example of you're too worried about your opponent if you're altering your behavior to sort of match their behavior. You're just simply too worried about your opponent. I feel the same way about Trevor Etienne. If I was Kirby Smart, I'd play him. And the fact that Clemson people think that's weak or somehow problematic would not bother me at all. Would not bother me at all. I think one of the simplest ways to identify a high-level performer in life is how little regard they give to what other people think. That high-level performers are just not thinking about other people. They're just not. Sort of mid-level, low-level performers are always slow to take action because, well, what would so-and-so think? Or, how will this reflect on me? Whatever. High-level performers have just shaken that off. They're just not that worried about it. Oh, I might get criticized for, whatever. High-level performers know that criticism is going to come no matter what, because the real offensive thing is not the particular behavior that's being criticized. It's the fact that you're achieving at a level that's higher than others. That's the thing that's really offensive. And so, therefore, if you're a high-level performer, you're always going to be criticized for something. So you might as well do what you feel like the right thing is, because the criticism is going to come no matter what. So, the idea that, how could Georgia do this? How could Georgia do that? Whatever the right thing here is should be done without any regard to how it may be received or what criticism may come. That's just how that should be handled. And certainly the thoughts of Clemson fans wouldn't be worth a nickel to me. Zoe Wader says, I think that Kirby will play them. It was interesting to hear, because I will tell you this. Forget official reports or anything like that, because this is the time of year in which unconfirmed speculation outpaces official reports by at least a 10-1 margin. It is not very hard to find somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody who will tell you they have it on good word that Trevor Etienne's not playing. It's not hard to find people who are saying that. There are people like that is the persistent rumor. I was somewhat surprised when I first heard that, but because I thought, and I've told you this many times, that when the charge got reduced, I thought that Etienne should probably play. If you get a DUI, you probably shouldn't. A lot of you, if you got a DUI, you'd get fired. I mean, DUI is a pretty serious thing. So if you got a DUI, missing a game seems, I would say, appropriate. But he didn't get a DUI. That charge got reduced. And so therefore, knowing that it was just essentially a, underage consumption issue, that's not the kind of thing I think you ought to miss a game for. I think that Kirby would have been well within his rights to play him. I think that Etienne would have been well within his rights to assume that he was playing. But the fact that this rumor persists leads me to believe that it's probably true. And Connor Riley suggesting that some of that comes from the fact that maybe this decision in this particular case may be being made above Kirby Smart. And, at one point in time, I think a lot of us probably wondered, is there anything above Kirby Smart? Well, maybe now there is. Let's see what else. Ron Collins says, can you please explain why all college football games are played on Saturday? Then the biggest college football game is played on Monday. It would be as big as the Super Bowl if it were played on Saturdays. Yeah, the issue here is, we've talked about this before. When you get into January, the NFL has just sort of taken charge of Saturdays. Now, would I rather watch the college football playoff than an NFL playoff game? I would. But the NFL, the one thing they do really well is cultivate television audiences. They're just really good at that. And they've made, playoffs on Saturday and Sunday a really big thing. So college football goes to Monday simply to avoid the NFL. They do. And at some point in time, the NFL may try to encroach on that Monday night because they have Monday night wildcard game now. That they may try to go encroach on that Monday and take that from college football there too. Look, there's obviously a war going on kind of against college football. And very quietly, I think the NFL knows it benefits from college football having to fight all these different wars and all these different fronts. And so at some point in time, I think that college football needs to recognize the NFL is not much of an ally. Certainly not trying to help college football, even though college football provides free marketing and free training for all future NFL employees. I think college football ought to notice the extent to which the NFL is not doing much to help out these days. And so I think at some point in time, you got to try to figure out how to fight back against the NFL, but you're not going to do it with TV ratings because that's the turf the NFL wants to fight you on. But that doesn't mean there aren't some potential fronts that the NFL could be vulnerable on, but you sort of got to figure out what those are. But when you look at, there was this thing, I'll take 2 seconds on this and I'm going to move on. There was this graphic that got shared the other day of all the places where college football is popular. And if you look at it, it's basically all the places where the NFL isn't. NFL dominates the cities, NFL dominates the Northeast, NFL probably dominates the far West, but everything else is college football. Like if you looked at the map, it's like there's blank space for New York, blank space for Chicago, blank space down for Miami, blank space out west, but all of the sort of more rural, southern, industrial Midwest, these are all big hotbeds for college football. Well, if you're the NFL, just think about this for 2 seconds. If you're the NFL, you see that as a threat. There is a large pocket of the country where college football is a big deal. How much more financial windfall would come our way if we eliminated this competition, or if we allowed it to be eliminated by some of the nonsense that's currently going on? Yeah, I can't help but shake that, and I'd love to say more, but I will not explain further. Let's see what else. Free Durden says, do you think that Branson Robinson or Nate Frazier are going to get more carries because of Etienne and the fact that he's questionable? Or do you think they lean on screens to others? So What I would say is that I think the chatter around Nate Frazier thus far this summer has been legitimate and very real. I think that Frazier is a real find for Georgia and probably a big part of the story here this season. But I don't think that shows up to the tune of being necessarily the lead rusher in his first college game in a spot where you're probably certainly without Rod Robinson and probably without Trevor Etienne there as well. Frazier still sort of feels like the somewhat change of pace to me. So in other words, if you're going to find rushing yards, I'm talking about the sort of traditional between the tackle stuff, it feels like you probably need to try to find out what Branson Robinson can provide for you. Or maybe some of that comes by way of Chauncey Bowens, who, is probably not as spectacular as Frazier, but maybe kind of ready for the sort of between the tackles grind there a little bit. It would not surprise me if the longest rush from scrimmage on Saturday comes from Nate Frazier, but the larger number of carries or the larger number of total rushing yards goes to somebody else. Maybe it's Branson Robinson. If I had to guess, that's my guess of perhaps how that plays out. Frank Patterson says, hey, don't forget about, Cash Jones. I do believe that Jones will play. I think he's certainly a weapon when you throw the ball out of the backfield. I think that Cash Jones is probably part of the story. Paul Moon says Frazier has it all, though. Well-rounded back, has some power, great burst and quickness. Probably the most athletic back we have. Maybe Phillips is more. Phillips definitely has more straight-line speed, but I don't know how much of a true running back Dwight Phillips is right now. And I'm expecting this to be a really good season for Nate Frazier. But in his first game, carrying the load for Georgia in all facets, I just don't quite know about that yet, but maybe he surprises me. Jonathan Air, we talked about Sid, vicious Sid Udy, also known as Psycho Sid. He says, do you remember Sid's nasty leg break in WCW in 2000? No, I don't guess I remember that. I think by 2000, I was probably waning a little bit with certainly I was waning on watching WCW. I don't quite remember that, but I did tell our audience a little earlier, obviously Sid passes away. Talk about a guy who just sort of had the look, big, tall, muscular dude. He had just had the look of a superstar. And at different times in his career, he was. I was a big Shawn Michaels fan. When Michaels got beat in Madison Square Garden by Sid, it would have been like, I think, Survivor Series of 96, maybe. I think it maybe would have been. I mean, the crowd was so behind Sid in that match, so behind him. Really amazing how over he was with that crowd. At different times, he sort of had that. Truly a guy, I mean, he achieved a lot. I think maybe he could have been used even better during his career than he was. But a real star in wrestling, a real star. Jay Scheib says Sid Bream is better than Sid Vicious. So there you go. Jay weighs in on his favorite Sid. Let's see what else. Foster Moss wondering about Dylan Bell. I think Dylan Bell's probably solely a wide receiver, I think. Dave Snow checking out. Dave, we're glad you're here. Heading out here today. Scott Harris mentions his hatred for Nick Fairley. I don't like him. Senior Dog gives his most hated teams. Auburn. He says for football, it's Auburn. For baseball, it's the Phillies. And for basketball, it's the Warriors. So there you go. Also, BMAC asked about Dylan Bell at running back, too. Yeah, if I had to guess, I think Bell's probably a wide receiver. Dave Snow said the last bowl game he attended was Kirby Smart's first bowl game that year in Memphis at the Liberty Bowl against TCU. What an interesting game to attend that must have been. Dave, I guess I'd be curious. Memphis, pretty good little restaurant town. We stopped in Memphis and spent the night on the way to Fayetteville, Arkansas in 2020. Yeah, there's some nice, maybe interesting is a better thing. There's some interesting parts of Memphis. How was that for the Liberty Bowl, I wonder? BMAC says he enjoyed the Orange Bowl last year. I actually saw BMAC at the Orange Bowl last year. And it's one of those deals of like, okay, it's a meaningless bowl, but it's still like Miami for New Year's Eve. That's not a terrible not a terrible way to spend your life. DT on the subject of the 2017 Rose Bowl. Yeah, I mean, pound for pound, it may be the most exciting Georgia game of all time, even more so than anything in 2021 and 2022, including the Peach Bowl win against Ohio State. I was watching those highlights last night. A lot of times I'll just, when I'm trying to exercise or something like that, I'll just sort of fire up a collection of highlights on YouTube just to sort of try to get me through it. Every now and then you sort of need that extra burst to be able to do that. And so so I enjoy, doing that. I was watching that Peach Bowl last night. Really, really fun. Rose Bowl is probably still the most exciting game Georgia's played in. And it's one of the most exciting college games of all time. And an all-time memory. Like an all-time memory. And there's sort of a bittersweet thing about that in a weird way. At times I'm probably guilty of being too philosophical. But in 2017, I'm, however old I was, younger, obviously, than I am now. And you have this sort of bittersweet feeling of, man, I'm experiencing the best thing I may ever experience. And yet, you think about it, well, I'm still, a young guy here. It's like, if it's all downhill from here as a sports fan, oh no. And now, obviously, Georgia's gone on to win more. But I don't know that anything was more fun than being in Pasadena and L.A. for that Rose Bowl. It's just a really incredible experience. Just an incredible experience. And it's sort of weird to think that, hey, this may be my moment here. Happening what you think of as relatively early in life. DT also mentioned Chuck Smith. I'm a fan of Chuck Smith. Chuck's been a guest on our show many times before. He's outside linebackers coach of the Ravens now. I think a really sharp guy. And I was glad to hear Davin give Chuck Smith a little bit of a shout-out there earlier. Let us see what else. Doggy says, remember when Tech took thousands of seats out of Bobby Dodd Stadium? Louis Grizzard had a field day with that. Yeah, obviously, we've heard a little bit more from Tech the last couple of days, but as I told you on Monday's show, I think there's a better chance that Tech is not bowl eligible than they are a top 25 team. I am not going to make too much out of a game in Ireland that most of us sort of thought was going to be a little bit problematic for Florida State anyway. We are not going to overreact to that. Shane Holiday, I think that's an interesting point. Shane says the media overhypes teams that are heavy in the transfer portal. I think to a degree that's probably true. I think to a degree what Shane is saying is true. And we talked about this during the offseason, which is some of the biggest stuff for Georgia are things that didn't happen. Mikael Williams didn't transfer. Christian Miller didn't transfer. Daniel Harris didn't transfer. Julian Humphrey didn't transfer. Those are really big deals for Georgia. Keeping those players on this team for this year, not taking a bag to go somewhere else, that's a really big deal. But if you're the media, either because you don't know it, because let's face it, I follow college football pretty closely. What's the biggest thing that didn't happen for Oklahoma this year, for instance? I have no idea. I follow college football closely enough to know the news. I don't follow college football, no one can, closely enough to always know what's something that could have happened that didn't. I'm saying that's a little bit more difficult thing to know. So a lot of times the media can't know what didn't happen. But even if you were aware of this, it's not that easy to sort of conjure up a narrative around, boy, Georgia had a few players that might would have transferred and they didn't. Okay, so, nothing happened is not a headline. And so therefore, for-profit media cannot build much off the idea of quiet offseason for Georgia. That might be a good thing. And so therefore, sometimes Georgia might get under-discussed. Whereas these heavy portal teams are obviously making things good on the media. I do think there's an attempt to make college football a little bit more like what the NBA has become. The NBA created itself into a 365-day a year, 12-month sort of storyline. Now, the unfortunate byproduct of that is, at this point in my life, I don't really care about the NBA at all. But, maybe some people in your life who do care about the NBA, it seems like there's more interest in like the free agency and who's going to try to team up and be a super team somewhere. There's more interest in the NBA off the floor than there is on the court, because during the regular season, half the guys aren't playing anyway, load management, things like that. And so therefore, week to week for 82 games, the NBA is pretty boring. But it seems like there's a lot of social media chatter around the off season of the NBA and who might get traded and who's signing where and who said what on a podcast, and therefore everybody's all up in their feelings. That's what the NBA has sort of been. And I think there's a huge effort right now to kind of NBA-ify college football to the point of, so-and-so's a super team. That's what Ohio State supposedly is right now, without ever having done anything on the actual field. So there definitely is an attempt to do that. And from your perspective, that might not be a bad thing. But whether it's good or bad, it is happening. I think that's true. Let's see what else. Scott Harris says, when Ringo intercepted that ball in Indianapolis, I saw so many grown men crying in the stands. 41 years of energy kind of coming out there. Yeah, I think you're right about that. I mean, I know for me, it was a very emotional experience for sure. Free Durden says, going to the Georgia game on Saturday at Mercedes-Benz. I worked for the stadium staff. I'll watch the game while working, kind of. He's got Georgia 35-17. Yeah, listen, I know all about watching games while kind of working. I know all about that. So, Free Durden, you and I will be right there in the same spot there on Saturday. Dustin Anthony says NBA is trying to be to Christmas like football is to Thanksgiving. I'm not liking it. Yeah, they have jam-packed that Christmas schedule, no doubt about that. Let's see what else. Let us see what else. Joseph Bryce says, yeah, we're doing Gainesville Westlake on Friday night. That's going to be a really good game. Gainesville's a terrific program right now. Obviously, Westlake of interest to Georgia fans because of Juan Gaston, and SEC fans obviously interested in Travis Smith. So I think one of the coolest developments for us here this year is the fact I believe the game is easier to stream than it's ever been before. The Atlanta News First site has got an easy link. Just click in and watch. It's easy to find. So our friends at Atlanta News First, that's CBS 46, what it used to be called, Atlanta News First, streaming the game on Friday. I think it's going to be really fun. Westlake and Gainesville coming up on Friday. So Atlanta News First for the stream on that. Alan Hampton says that Davin Bellamy and Jonathan Ledbetter's moms invited my wife and me to eat in Knoxville after we stomped the Vols. Wonderful ladies. They kept us laughing. Yeah. One of the cool things about the job that I do is I do get to know a lot of the player families. And, it's just a really fun experience because they're obviously many of them having the time of their life, watching their kids play major college football. And, as you said, sharing a meal with them like that, it's really very fun to see. Just a cool experience. And I'm glad you had that. I've gotten to know a number of the families, and I enjoy seeing them on game day and kind of celebrating with them. And obviously, they love the fact that, DawgNation is so welcoming. I'm talking about all of you, so welcoming to them. They're, the ones I've experienced anyway are all having a great time. And so that's a fun thing to be a part of for sure. Good to see Christian here today. Mark Morris says Davin Bellamy was great for us for a few years ago. Part of the bridge from good to great for our Dogs. Loved him. Yeah, I think you're right, Mark. It's an important building block for what Georgia became. Let's Go Brandon says, do you think that the clean old-fashioned hate is going to see a much-needed revival to that rivalry? mean, by the appearances now, it's certainly more interesting on that Black Friday night than it probably otherwise would have been. So, yeah, I mean, I think in a roundabout way, Tech has played at least well enough to get a little bit more of Georgia's attention. I think you're probably right about that. JC thinks that DJ Uiagalelei is probably overrated. I believe you're probably right about that. All right, final comments here for a moment. Let's see what else. Scott Harris asked a good question. You know, last year, Georgia had Brock Bowers to sort of step up and do whatever needed to be done when others were having sort of a, as he calls it, a down day. Who's that guy here this year? He says maybe Dylan Bell. He may be as good a candidate as anyone is. You may be right about that. Let's go to Facebook here for a moment. Jerry Popham says the tradesmen, as he calls Georgia Tech, they still got many miles to go in their recovery process. They started de-emphasizing their football program, or lack of one, many decades ago by dropping out of the SEC. Then, when not welcome back, joining the substandard ACC and reduced the seating capacity of their stadium and still can only fill half of it. He says Tulane has done a better job in their post-SEC world than Tech probably has. So Jerry making it very clear how he feels about Georgia Tech, which is fun to see. Good stuff, Jerry. Good stuff for sure. Lucy Bowers-Boykin, thanks for that. Really appreciate that. Thank you for being here today. Let's see what else. Winford Steinspring getting excited about the weekend. Winford, I am there too, for sure. Drew Thrasher says, who's the breakout freshman going to be? Well, we talked about Nate Frazier earlier. No matter what his overall load ends up being on Saturday, it seems like he's probably the safest answer to that question, I would probably say. So, good stuff. We're going to kind of leave it there for today. Thank you for making this a fun show. Thanks for making this a fun game week for us, getting it all started here. So we're looking forward to a Saturday for sure. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They'll show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on all of that. So have a great day, everybody. See you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. RS Andrews after that. So if your water heater goes out, don't forget, in many cases, RS Andrews can replace it for you the same day. You just got to find them online at rsandrews.com. And if you want to join our giveaway, or our friends at Atlanta Sports Trips giveaway for the DawgNation Invasion, you can do that there as well. So please check them out. Find them today. That is on DawgNation.com for more on that. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. We'll look forward to talking to you then.